loved hamburgers. But Wimpy never had any money. So Wimpy's famous saying was, "I will gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today." That is the American government today. That we do things, we don't pay for any of them, but someday we will. But that someday is this. My friends, Jordan and Peter Hanscom, just had a baby boy about 5 months ago. You know what he was born into? $67,000 in debt. And it is because we didn't have the responsibility to pay for our bills. At the end of next year, 2019, the deficit's going to $23 trillion. It is on an unstoppable course unless we do something here to be at $30 trillion. And so what did we do here? We passed a tax cut. Because what's another $1.5 trillion? A tax cut at a time when we have a full employment economy, a strong economy. We pass a tax cut, and we're now running in a great economy over $1 trillion deficit every year. If we can't balance our books now, when are we ever going to do this?
Good afternoon, everybody. It is heartbreaking to me to watch that, to talk about 21 trillion, and today we're at $36 trillion. The last thing I ever wanted to do was to be somebody who saw into the future on this and be right. But we are going down an unstoppable path that is going to damage the entire country. That is damaging the entire country. That's damaging all of our rural communities, our hospitals, our Social Security, our Medicare, our interest rates, all of these things. And so what did we do? It's like I said last time, we passed another tax cut. Last week, President Trump signed his signature tax and policy legislation, the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, during a gaudy celebration at the White House. It reminded me of the last celebration at the White House. And then we were 2 trillion further in debt. This one could put us up to 5 trillion more in debt. It's a massive piece of legislation that impacts almost all of American life. We will briefly cover what some of the biggest impacts will be. Before we start, a quick reminder to our viewers, submit any questions through the Q&A button on your screen. I want to welcome our guest for this conversation, Maya McGuinness, the president of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Her areas of expertise include budget, tax, economic policies. Maya was one of the people I always counted on when I was in the Senate to try to tell me the impact of legislation. It's just an extraordinary leader. Maya, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I will say, watching that made me really sad. You were a real leader on this issue when you were there. And I talked to a lot of people about it. And it is a hard issue to work on, to lead on, to know the truth on, and to tell people. And we need politicians who are willing to do that. And listening to that talk of yours reminded me what it was like to have partners in that and how it feels like there's a real dearth of them today. So thanks for hosting me. And it made me sad.
It made me sad too. It made me sad because I have also gotten older since then too. But you look at that, and one thing I always said was the Soviet Union didn't fall because of the United States, because of our military. It fell because they went broke and they could no longer sustain their operations. And I feel like we're betraying the people of this country because the same thing is happening here right now.
You know, it's fascinating. I was actually just thinking about that this weekend, which is the weapons of war right now are not boots on the ground and tanks the way that they have been in the past. And the Cold War was kind of showed what kinds of changes were happening. But you can trick a country into harming itself. We're seeing that on so many fronts right now. And I'd say social media is a part of that. That's another passion of mine. But on this, it is just, it's crazy to watch a country that engaged in the Cold War successfully, watching a different country outspend and outborrow itself. And yet we are taking a page from the loser's playbook of just borrowing into oblivion with no care and making up excuses for why it's okay. And the saddest thing is that our adversaries just have to sit back and watch us do it.
You
And
don't
that,
have to do anything.
no,
They
it's,
just-
you know, you
We are,
chuckle.
we are imploding. Yeah.
We are doing this to ourselves. And I understand that it's hard for people to see it as the same kind of weapon as a gun or a tank, but it is. We are harming our own nation in a way that we will not be able to sustain the things we've had in the past, and we will do real damage.
You know, in talking there, I remember being with Jim Cooper. I was a member of the Blue Dogs in the House in 2008. And we had a big summit of the Blue Dogs because the deficit had hit $10 trillion, 10T. And we said, we've got to stop this. We've got to put PAYGO in place. We've got to make sure if you spend money, it's somehow paid for. And PAYGO would come and PAYGO would go, but there was always an effort. Well, let's try to pretend it's not there. Let's make this one, we'll waive it on this one. But 10 trillion became 20, became 30. Today it's 36, expected to be 40 soon. The question becomes, how long can we keep doing this?
Yeah, the question, when is the tipping point? And the issue here is that we don't know, because it really depends on how long people will start keep lending to us at these rates. We are seeing signs of concerns. We are seeing the fact that other nations are diversifying away from the US, meaning they are turning less to treasuries, both in moments of strength and weakness. They are not lending the US as much. And we are seeing concern from people who are engaged in the financial markets and lend to the US. I'm hearing from people in the world of finance much, much more than I used to. We know that within 2 years after this bill, we will hit the record level of debt as a share of GDP not seen since World War II, and then we will go past it quickly. So we are going into uncharted territory. The problem in some ways is that we are the reserve currency and the safe haven, meaning countries want to lend to us when they're concerned. But the more you take advantage of that, the more quickly you lose it. And we are absolutely now on the trend of moving towards losing it as other countries are looking for other places to put their money because they're worried the US is not such a good bet. We've seen all three major rating agencies downgrade us as just one of the many, many signs of that. But we don't know, to answer your question, we don't know when the tipping point will be. And I will say point blank, if we find out, shame on us. We should never know, because we should make changes before we hit it.
Well, I looked at the discussion around this bill, and I saw, excuse me, I saw member after member of the House and Senate get up and say, I am a fiscal hawk. And I said, how long will it be before the cards get folded, right? What is going on that when all of the smartest minds in finance say this is a disaster, when people all over the country who have to every night sit at the kitchen table and make hard choices, it's like, you know what, we're not getting a new car, we're gonna find a used car or lease a small car, and they stand up and say we're going to make the tough choices, and there's no tough choice here. we are cutting our revenue drastically to give it away. We're taking away from the people struggling the most, those Hoosier families in Indiana who are trying to figure out how to make ends meet, and giving it to the Elon Musks of the world. This is crazy.
So let me first say that it is our politicians' job to lead. You know, this is an issue of leadership. We know that there are these huge potential crises sitting out there, and it is incumbent on our leaders to be honest with us, do the right thing, make the real choices. In their defense, and I'll only mount a tiny defense, they get mixed messages. So like you just said, and I agree, the market folks who are showing concern. At the same time, they want their tax cuts. So they would come in and say, we are so worried about the national debt. We need these tax cuts. And that's when you start getting to the point where people are making up stories of, oh, and if we have tax cuts, it will grow the economy at astronomical rates that nobody's predicting except for the advocates of the plan. But trust us, everyone else is wrong and we're right. And that is why we should cut taxes and reduce our borrowing at the same time, which isn't going to happen. And likewise, voters. We all say, we are so worried about this. We are fiscally irresponsible. We need to do something. As a household, I need to make my choices. And then, and you've lived this, then we all go to the politicians and say, I want a tax cut and keep your hands off of my spending programs. So no, right now, the political incentives are completely not aligned with the right things to do fiscally. But that's not really what's the issue here. I believe the issue here is that many, many conservatives who are working on this bill, and I work closely with them, I shouldn't say many, there was a small group who actually tried
And let
to
me
make
mention
it more
real quick, you
responsible.
are nonpartisan, period.
Yeah.
Democrat, not Republican. You work with anybody who wants to fix the problem.
You bet. Thank you. I'm as politically independent as they get. And worked with people who I had never worked with before, some of the biggest fiscal conservatives out there, and they really tried their best to not just increase the spending reductions or the offsets, but decrease the tax cuts. But in the end, there was fiscal capitulation across the board, and every member who voted for a policy that would increase the debt by $4 to $5.5 trillion harmed the country. And the reason they did this is that the president was insistent that these changes come around. And I think you watched a lot of people compromise what might have been fiscal responsibility otherwise, but they cast the vote. And so they are no longer can claim worrying about the debt legitimately, I'm afraid.
And it had to be by July 4th, which was a completely artificial date. I mean,
mean,
July
nobody
4th
read the
is still
bill.
coming.
Nobody knew what was in it. We're still finding out what's in it. Why the rush? It's just a terrible, terrible way to govern, as you know.
I remember somebody I respect immensely, President Obama, calling me into the White House and basically reading me the Riot Act because I wasn't in agreement with him on a piece of legislation. I had a different view of it. And he was so angry. And I said to him, and you know, it's basically the mantra or the Bible of somebody serving in the House or Senate. I said, Mr. President, I respect you. I will work with you, but I do not work for you. I work for the people of the state of Indiana and the people of the United States. We just have a disagreement.
Yeah.
And he understood that 100%. He was not happy, but he thought his view was a better way to get there. And he was a fabulous president. But on some things we didn't agree. And my job was to also tell him when that happened, not just to do what he wanted me to do.
I couldn't agree with you more. And again, as a political independent, but it really concerns me when I see parties marching in lockstep. It's kind of scary to me because people represent different parts of the country, different along the political ideology, different spectrums, different levels of conservatism or progressive, or like you could think one thing about foreign policy, another thing about economic policy. But when you see everybody falling in line and voting the way the president tells them, that means they're not putting the interests of their constituents first. And I would say on things like the debt, it means you're putting political interests ahead of national interests. And I know this issue is hard, and I know the solutions are really difficult politically. But if you care, as you talked about in your speech, about leaving for an economy that's stronger for the next generation, you cannot borrow your way to prosperity. We will borrow our way to a serious fiscal reckoning that will be harmful across the board economically, for American families, in terms of national security, and absolutely for our future generations.
The church I belong to in South Bend, Indiana, we had a pastor who had some good ideas and borrowed to try to achieve them. And every year we seem to get deeper in a hole for these good ideas. And there were some of us going, you know what, we don't really need some of this stuff, but we'd get deeper in the hole. And then the pastors were changed and a new pastor came in and he came up to the pulpit on Sunday. One Sunday he goes, look, I'm happy to be assigned here, but here's the deal. If we don't have the money, we're not going to buy something. From now on, the line is drawn. Those days are over. We're going to dig ourselves out. And in about a year, we had dug ourselves out. We were fine. We didn't miss any of those things that were supposedly so critical. And all of a sudden, we had a strong finance base in the parish again. It's not that much different. That you just have to say no sometimes. And you have to be in a position where you look and you go, you know what? 70% of something's better than 100% of nothing. Sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's two important points to this. The first is we need to have a goal. People need to understand what it is that we're pushing for, because the fiscal fixes often just sound like punitive, difficult things. We're going to raise taxes, we're going to cut spending. And while that's true, the point is we're going to fix this fiscal situation. We're going to because we have to keep our country strong. We have to save Social Security. We have to for the next generation. There are really strong reasons why these goals are important. And the second thing is there's knee-jerk opposition to everything. And to generalize, you'll have Republicans saying not a penny in tax increases and Democrats saying you can't cut any spending. Those are gross generalizations because actually both parties like to do tax cuts and spending increases.
Right.
But, you can find savings all over the place. It's not going to be easy. We've now dug ourselves in such a fiscal hole. We're going to need to save many trillions, which will take some real choices. But these don't have to be massive disruptions to households. They do have to happen quickly, though, before we wait until there is a tipping point and it's pushed upon us. That time, it becomes a crisis and the changes are incredibly, incredibly painful. But when everybody's dug in saying, I won't do a single thing, and they whip up constituencies and interest groups and political attack ads, that's when it's a really difficult environment.
That's when you earn your pay. That's when you earn your pay. And
right.
We have to hit this number. Yeah.
And I think we need to find more of a way. We give out, fiscal, we try to recognize those people who are good fiscally, things like that. But you've got interest groups that are pushing so much harder against anybody who does a hard thing. We need to really recognize who the real people who are acting courageously on this are and recognize.
I remember being in a meeting in the White House before the 2017 tax cut, and the corporate tax rate was 35, and they were, initially talking about 28.
28.
And then they said 21. And I'm
like, the CEOs were like 21.
Wow, how did we go to 21 from? I thought 28 wasn't great unless we raise the same revenue. How are we now at 21? And they said, well, at 21, we'll raise even more revenue.
Yeah.
And I looked and I said, well, I have an idea. Why don't we go to 0? Then we'll raise more than we ever dreamed of, right? I mean, this crazy math.
Oh, but that's exactly right. So then what happens, what replaces the real decisions about trade-offs and making budgets, and I should say, we don't even pass budgets anymore, but is people start to rely on these made-up fiscal myths. Tax cuts do not pay for themselves. They do grow the economy by enough to offset a small portion of the revenue loss, generally in the neighborhood of 20%. But then people start putting these magic numbers out there, and I don't like to say lies, but lies when people say that something will pay for itself. And we've had similar things on the other side where people are saying this is so important, we shouldn't pay for it. Right. When I would say if something's really important, we should. And people saying, don't worry, we should just print our way out of this problem. Incredibly dangerous. No, we should not. But it's just like, it's like the dog ate my homework. It's coming up with the lamest excuses for not doing what you actually need to do to govern.
So I wanted to ask you, what are going to be the effects? I mean, I look at the rural communities and I was thinking Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, farm programs, overall bond markets, interest rates. What do you see as the effects when this continues?
There are a lot of them. You mentioned Social Security. I think that's an incredibly important one because the program right now, it was slated to become insolvent in only 8 years. And in 8 years, if we haven't made changes, there will be across the board benefit cuts for every participant in Social Security of over 20%, 22%. That's outrageous. People, many, many people, the majority of people depend on this program for their livelihood.
That is how they feed themselves.
Yeah, this is a life or death program. And the bill that we just passed will make that insolvency not in 8 years, but in 7 years. It brought the insolvency up a year. That is so dangerous. And it just defies all sensibilities. Everybody understands the importance of this program, though not enough to fix it, which is what we should be doing. Secondly, it's going to push up interest rates, which means the cost of a mortgage, a car loan, your credit card, all of those things will be driven up. And that slows economic growth. And what that means is your wages slow down, job loss is more likely, our overall standard of living doesn't grow as quickly. And then more troubling, I think, is if there's another emergency, and I wish there weren't going to be, but there will. It will be a recession, or it will be a pandemic, or it will be something new, an attack, or something, a natural disaster, or something we haven't thought of. There will be emergencies. That's when we should borrow. And if we borrow too much now when times are good, we will not be able to borrow at low rates when times are bad, which means recessions can become depressions. And at this point, I'm worried about our national security. I'm worried that we can't think about a national security policy free of budgetary constraints. I'd rather think about what the most important things are to be secure, not what we are able to invest in or not. And in terms of, you know, uh, uh, farm farm workers in the Midwest, all of these issues, every time that the interest payments on the budget grow, and they are the fastest growing part of the budget right now, and they're the second largest item, that puts pressure on every other part of the budget. So things will be slashed. I guess we have a choice now: sensible, targeted, thought out cuts and tax increases, or things that will be slashed across the board and do real damage and real pain with not enough time to adjust. And I don't know how anyone says, let's wait it out and take that second bucket, because that's going to create real damage to people who try to work with the government or dependent on the government and our overall economy.
I look at the deficit, and unfortunately at this point, the annual deficit, you look and you go, if we only had $1 trillion for a year, it'd be a good year the way
Yeah.
we're going. But you also look at the spending, and 1 trillion of it is just interest payments now. Think of what that 1 trillion could do for education, for food programs, for strengthening our economy, for rural economy. It's just breathtaking.
And we spend more on interest payments than we do on national defense. And we
Right.
spend on more on interest payments than the federal government spends on all spending for children, people under 18. How's that for priorities? That is basically financing the borrowing of the past at the expense of investing in the future. That is not what our country's about.
And if you are in your 30s or 40s or younger, or even in your 50s now, you look and you go, why am I paying the bills
Yeah.
that were accumulated by this other crew? And so it's tougher for me to get a house. It's tougher for me to get a car. My options are limited in terms of job opportunities, because $1 trillion that used to go into growing the economy is gone now just to pay bills. Why are my choices limited? Because of the choices these folks made in refusing to live responsibly.
You know, you're so right to bring that up. A lot of things have me deeply concerned these days. One of them is for how routinely I'm hearing from younger people, I'm not in it. I don't believe in our systems. I don't believe our democracy or our capitalism are standing right by me, and I don't want to do this, which means an airtight promise we've had in Social Security starts to become vulnerable. If younger generations, and I completely agree with them, I sympathize with them, they say, you have put hundreds of thousands of dollars, which is what it will be, in debt obligations on me, promises that you've told me I have to pay in an incredibly risky world, not doing it. And the last thing we need right now as a country, we need to find a way to unify and unite. We are dangerously vulnerable because of our divisions. And if we add to those divisions between young and old, which I fear we are on course to do, we will be in such a world of pain and such a loss of what we could have been. And they are right to be angry that we have served as poor stewards.
When you talk to our young people, as you do, as I do, I have 2 kids and a grandchild, and you talk to young people, their friends and everyone, and they're like, we're never going to get Social Security. That's not going to be around. They don't believe in the basic promises that have been made because they've seen the conduct that has occurred.
Yep. They don't have trust. And that's the huge loss of trust in our leaders and our institutions that makes any of these programs that rely on trust so difficult to maintain.
So how do we stop the train? This monstrous train that you see the old pictures from out west where the tracks end here, and it's coming at about 50 miles an hour toward the end of the track.
Yeah, yeah.
Everybody's looking at each other like, what do we
I
do
want to
now?
get off. I always actually, the analogy I always think of is I'm a new skier and a bad skier. And as soon as I start tumbling, like zooming down the mountain, I'm like, oh my God, when do I fall and tumble? Do I do it now or do I wait? And it's going to be even harder later. And I just, the vision's always in my head.
What do these black diamonds mean?
Yeah, how did I get here? I want to get off. But the thing is, we know the solutions. We know how to do this. First, we have to put in place a budget every year. We don't, we need to start, and that budget needs to have a goal. I think there's a goal that's floating out there that the Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary Bessent, has talked about, and Ray Dalio and others. But we should bring our deficit, which is over 6% of GDP, down to 3% of GDP over the next decade. We need budgets with plans to do that. Number two, not only do we need to go back to the world of PAYGO, where you don't do anything that isn't offset, I think our situation is so bad that you need super PAYGO. And super PAYGO would mean anytime you pass a tax cut or a spending increase, you need a little bit extra as a down payment on debt reduction because you're using up offsets that should go for a fiscal deal.
Kind of like when you buy the house, you pay your mortgage and you put another 40 bucks
A little,
aside.
you put a little extra aside, exactly. Third, I think we need a plan to fix Social Security. We know that there is this moment in 7 years, we've got to fix Social Security. And finally, we should put in place a fiscal commission. Oh, and Social Security, we should raise the retirement age. We're all living longer. Not immediately, but we should put in place now for down the road. We should protect seniors, but we should slow the growth of benefits for the well-off for the future, and we should lift the payroll tax cap. There's a lot of different combinations for how to do it, but there are reasonable ideas out there. We have an exercise online people are welcome to look at. Finally, we need a fiscal commission where we bring in bipartisan, bicameral folks. They spend a year starting to understand the issue. A lot of people don't understand as well as they should. Learn about the values the other members have, come up with compromises, and combine it with a public education campaign so people in the country understand why it's important. Because I know it's not a kitchen table issue. People are worried about the direct costs they face, but this affects every single one of them. This is the crumbling of the foundation of the country. So sort of explaining to people while a fiscal commission's working through those issues, why these things are so important, I think would be useful. So we know how to fix this. The question is whether we have the political will.
You know what you talked about the family. It's like the plumbing pipes. It's like the furnace, and the plumbing is leaking. The furnace is out, and it's not that visible, but it is the thing that will collapse the house at the end of the day.
Don't say that because I really think I have a leak going into my living room right now. And
well,
that's
I have a lot
of
friends who are union plumbers, and they are ready to go. All you have to do
I
is
need them.
But yeah, I was looking at the same thing about how do we get out? And so with a commission, do you put it before the Congress, up or down? Yes or no?
Yeah, I think you have to because it lends them the cover, right? Then they could say, I would have done better myself, but we got to do something, so I'll take it.
Yeah.
I think up or down.
And you put in super PAYGO. One of the other things is, and this is such a nebulous thing, but it's like a re-understanding of who you work for in these offices. If the president, whoever the president might be, yells and screams at you, hey, it's just like somebody else who's yelling and screaming at you. Your constituents are your constituents. They're the ones who you work for. And
100%.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say 100%. I will say, when you say yelling and screaming, there's a lot of yelling and screaming right now. And we got to tone this down. We have to speak to each other with respect. We have to understand that we all have different preferences and opinions, and that doesn't make someone else bad. It makes it a legitimate difference, which is the beautiful diversity of our country. We have different opinions and preferences, and we've got to work them out. So I really implore people to talk to their leaders, but also in a respectful way. Like we got to have good people doing these jobs. And to each of us, to our neighbors, I'm just as worried as I am about the debt, I'm also worried about our divisions and the coarseness of our politics.
Right. And I have to believe, like the legislators who looked at this legislation in the past few weeks, they knew in their heart what was happening.
I know.
And
you can't look at it and believe that this was going to actually live up to any of the fake promises they put out there. This is going to layer on borrowing that they know is not good for the country.
And so when you look at our future, you see the bond rates going up, and a question becomes, is there a time when the bonds are out there that
Mm.
look and go, well, there are better places to put my money than here, better, safer places. And that's when the panic button, I guess, gets hit.
And once that button gets hit, you don't get to rewind. You don't get to make the changes on our own terms. Then somebody else is setting the terms. And that is what we could easily avoid, but only if we make changes from how we're headed right now.
Yeah. And for our rural communities, they share so many of the same concerns and things that need to be done that are important that we talked about: stability, interest rates being low, inflation being low. That
Yeah.
enables them to have some certainty as to what they're going to be doing for the next year, what costs are going to be, whether they're going to be able to make a profit, whether they're going to be able to see their rural hospitals stay open as Medicaid benefits go down. So we really have challenges. I'm incredibly grateful to you for being here, because you've been on this, you know this, you have told, you've told what's the word? Spoken truth to power. And they just need to start listening, because this train is heading down the tracks. And for our children, our grandchildren, for the other generations of our country, we have an obligation, it seems.
Well, thank you for having been a great senator while you were here. Thank you for being a great person. It's nice to see you, and I'm really glad you invited me to join you.
Thank you for being with us today. We sure
Yeah.
are appreciative. Thanks.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.